Deer season opens and the hunters head out to put meat in the freezer while stopping a public health threat. It's deer that are killing us and not climate change today on The 10th Man. A 47-year-old New Jersey man ate a hamburger at a backyard barbecue and was dead a few hours later. The official cause, fatal anaphylaxis from Alfa-gal syndrome. Now, they didn't really know this at first, and he had already suffered an earlier episode of GI distress, vomiting, diarrhea, etc., a few hours after eating steak during a camping trip weeks earlier. And it's a wonder we even found out about this because his death was just initially classified as sudden, unexplained death, but his wife requested blood tests, and at the University of Virginia, they discovered that he had extreme levels of mast cell activation for the medical professionals out there, and antibodies to a sugar molecule, consistent with fatal anaphylaxis from the allergy. Now, here's the thing. This Alfa-gal syndrome, AGS, it's a delayed allergic reaction, and delay is important in identifying it, to a molecule called galactose alpha, and it's found in most mammals, but not in primates, and that is us, or that is we. It's not a venom or a toxin, and it's not at all some kind of climate artifact. In fact, it's very much not anything to do with climate. It's simply a sugar molecule that gets transferred from some mammal to us via a tick. And this was attributed to the spread of the Lone Star tick. And of course, they got to tie that to climate. But here's the thing, the first thing they didn't say. Any tick can transmit alpha-gal. So any tick, if it feeds on a deer, raccoon, cow that has the alpha-gal in it, then it can pass it along to a human by feeding on the human. So, of course, they want to say there's one evil tick in a climate story. Comforting myth, but biology really doesn't care about your politics or your headlines, and this is just not true. Now, this Lone Star tick, does it spread? Is it spreading? Well, yes, it does spread. It is spreading, but here's the big thing about that. Ticks themselves don't migrate. They have these really short little legs. They don't have any wings. And so they don't roam the countryside checking out Zillow listings to figure out where their next home is going to be. They just ride along on their host animal, like deer. And the white-tailed deer is the Uber, the Lyft, the Amtrak, Delta Airlines of the tick world. Wherever the deer go, that's where the ticks go. And I'd be willing to wager the ticks are also traveling on illegal aliens, but we don't want to be too political and we don't have any proof of that. But the thing about it, so there's so many big lies. I've got this written down as the second big lie. Is it the second or is it the third? The thing is that the Lone Star tick is not some brand new immigrant species. Every place that it's moving to now, it used to be there. It once roamed much of the eastern U.S. in the 1700s, and there are, contemporaneous accounts of it, and they vanished from large swaths as deer numbers declined. But what we're seeing now is simply a reoccupation of its old turf, along with other ticks, driven by the booming deer herd size, which goes with suburban edge habitat. Deer are what we call edge animals. If you're going hunting, you look for them at the edge of the field, where the field and the woodlands come together. So suburbs create edge habitat. This is not some magical leap into colder zones because of climate change. It has nothing to do with climate change. It's all about habitat and deer wandering. And there's plenty of habitat because America is just one giant deer buffet. We've got lawns, suburbs, gardens, golf courses, where we also see the geese, more about that, and apple trees and hostas. They're out eating your hostas, aren't they? Hosses are like chocolate cake to the deer. So while the news is claiming the Lone Star tick is expanding its range, the real truth is really simple. Deer expanded their range first. Because here's something I bet you didn't know. This is the least known ecological truth of our day in terms of the actual numbers. How many deer do you think there are in America right now compared to when Columbus discovered America? Because, the white man came and wiped out all the animals, right? Well, before Columbus, the estimates are that there were around 300,000 deer in all of North America. Today, there are over 30 million. And for those of us who have trouble with moving decimal points, how many fold decrease or increase is that? It's 100-fold increase. There are 100 times as many deer in America now as there were before the white man came. So ever since Bambi, people have thought deer are fragile and majestic. Well, they're not. They're not. Wherever people go, you know what follows them? What follows people wherever they go is pigeons, cockroaches, and rats. And deer. And deer, like my uncle said, back on the farm, are just long-legged rats. They're very much like rats. How did the plagues spread? Bubonic plague was spread by parasites, fleas, on rats. Just like the, Alfa-gal syndrome is being spread by parasites, ticks, on the deer. So deer are attractive vermin, but vermin by the literal definition. They're overpopulated, disease-spreading nuisance species. But because they're pretty and because Disney draws eyelashes on them, all of the awfuls, American white female liberals, treat them like they're magical creatures. The animal lovers are the biggest enemies to conservation because we've seen all this before. Do you know what a starling is? Starlings are these black iridescent birds, medium-sized, smaller than a robin, bigger than a sparrow. Oh, sparrow, there's another one. That we see all over America, but they're not native here. Starlings are great for kids with a BB gun because you're allowed to shoot them anytime, anywhere. And you know why? Because there are 200 million of them here that came from 100 that were released in Central Park. Back in the 1890s, a bunch of literary romantics, a bunch of intellectuals, not scientists, not conservationists, but Victorian bird fanciers who were obsessed with Shakespeare, they decided that America should have every bird mentioned in Shakespeare's works. So a man released 100 European starlings in Central Park in 1890. He should have been put in jail because their descendants now number 200 million, and they aggressively displace our native nesters like bluebirds and woodpeckers. But at least we have the good sense to allow boys to shoot those with their BB guns. We're not so smart about the mute swans or the Canada geese. Mute swans, the same thing. People thought they looked good in Europe. We should bring them here as ornamental lawn decorations for the wealthy. So they went to estates, gardens, and city parks. People released them into the wild or allowed them to escape. No scientist or ecologist or biologist thinks that that's a good idea because now they're competing with our native trumpeter swans, tundra swans. They rip up submerged vegetation. They aggressively chase off native ducks and geese. Yes, I watch this every year, but we're not allowed to touch them. And let's just pause for a moment to say, please ask a friend to listen to The 10th Man. The way we grow is by word of mouth, so we appreciate your spreading the word. Now back to this episode. Speaking of the geese, then there's the Canada geese. We were talking about these at work one time, and one of the gals there, one of the awfuls, the American white female liberal, said, well, yeah, but they were here first. They absolutely were not here first. The Canada geese, and say Canada, not Canadian, the Canada geese in the mid-20th century, some wildlife agencies thought it would be a good idea to collect some non-migratory captive Canada geese and introduce them around the country to restore populations. The problem with this is migratory behavior is learned, it's not automatic. You'd think biologists would know that, wouldn't you? So the young geese follow the older birds on migration routes, but these reintroduced geese were effectively a new culture, not a new species, but a new culture. And they had no elders to teach them the route, so they stayed put. So now we have permanent, year-round resident goose populations exploding across suburbs, golf courses, office parks, and city lakes. So these are invasive birds by any rational ecological definition, even though they're technically native. I'm sure this is too complicated for some people, but if you released wild buffalo into Central Park, that also would be a bad idea, wouldn't it? The funny thing is how easily we could eradicate the non-migratory goose problem. Do you know how easy this would be? And not but just by saying it's okay for boys to shoot them with their pellet guns. That also would take care of the problem. But you know, in the spring when you see the geese waddling around with their goslings following them, do you know that you could catch them with a net then? Because once a year the geese molt their flight feathers, and God has wisely provided that that's a time when they're raising their goslings, so therefore they have to be around to protect them anyway, so they can't fly. So you could just catch all the geese on the golf course by throwing a net over them, and then give one to every person on snap and use it to eat, and you could eliminate two problems. You'd eliminate the goose problem and the snap problem, because the people on snap are too lazy to pluck a goose and eat it. They only eat Hot Pockets. And there's other examples like the Burmese pythons in the Everglades, killing all the small mammals in the Everglades because animal lovers released pythons from Asia into the wild. And do you know that they have python roundups? You get a prize for catching the most pythons. But when you catch them, you have to kill them ethically. How about that? The awfuls have stepped in and said, you've got to kill the pythons ethically. I mean, you catch a python, what do? You take your machete, you whack its head off. But if you do that, it doesn't count. You have to ethically pith the animal. Because we all know that when pythons strangle or smother their prey to death, they're killing it ethically. Another one is aquatic weeds. If you live on a lake or live by a lake and you see them spraying for the weeds and you think, oh, what an intervention with nature. No. All of the aquatic weeds, all of them, are weeds that came from people with aquariums. Foreign water weeds that grew well in aquariums grew just as well in our native lakes. So they're smothering the wildlife and the plant life in our lakes. Again, thank you, animal lovers. And this goes both directions, by the way. Right now, Italy is being overrun with American gray squirrels. Same thing. The animal lovers there decided to release those into the wild, and they're displacing the native features. So then what follows is a public scolding of anyone who tries to fix it. If you're a hunter or a wildlife manager, the farmers, airport officials, they're all demonized by people who think nature is just a Disney movie. And now you're seeing the same thing with ticks and the deer. Don't cull the herds. Don't bait them. Let's protect them because they're majestic creatures. They're always majestic creatures. And meanwhile, the deer populations explode. So tick populations explode. Disease spreads. People get sick. And now at least one man has died. You know, America doesn't have an invasive species crisis. America has a people who think nature is cute crisis. But of course, this story can confuse news reporters, so whenever they get confused, they just pull the fire alarm and say, climate change, because that can explain everything. Of course, if it explains everything, it explains nothing, because actually, AGS follows a simple non-climate change. Deer explode in population. Hunting laws restrict hunting and culling. The human to deer overlap increases. Tick bites increase. And alpha-gal sensitization rises. The correct headline should have been, deer overpopulation drives tick-borne meat allergy. But that's not going to get the clicks, is it? You know, nature controls deer three different ways. The first way is with predation. The second is with limitations on habitat. And the third is human harvest. Now we're separating human harvest from predation because predators, the natural predators, are too few, and we have to call that out. There's not a lot of mountain lions and bears roaming the forest, the primary predators of the deer. And when we talk about habitat, the habitat is too good. In fact, we can't overemphasize this. All animal threats are habitat threats. All the real animal threats are habitat. And you should remember this whenever anybody says anything about hunting. Hunting never threatens a population. No animal population has ever been threatened by hunting for sport. It's just an oxymoron. It can't be done. You only have sports hunting when the population is plentiful. Habitat loss is what you always have to look for, and this is one thing the environmentalists get right, at least as far as it goes, when they talk about polar ice and polar bears. You see, when they talk about polar ice, and they get everything else wrong about this, but they are looking at the habitat. At the same time, they don't allow hunting polar bears, but that's another story. So you don't have any predators, you have plenty of habitats, so the only remaining mechanism is hunting. And we cripple that with regulations. Take baiting, for example. You got an apple tree, apples fall out of it and on the ground, and deer show up. Acorns fall, and deer show up. Hunters, especially the good ones, they'll go out and do acorn surveys, look at which trees have the most growing acorns on it, and then they'll set up their blind there later in the fall. And everybody groups around a natural apple tree that's out in the woods, because that's where the deer will be. And in some places, you can apply bait artificially. You can buy a bunch of apples or a bunch of carrots or a bunch of corn and spread it out in the woods, but not when the politicians get involved. Where I live and in many other places, it's illegal to put bait out in the woods. If apples fall from a tree in your yard, fine. Pick up the apples and move them someplace else, you're breaking the law. Meanwhile, suburban homeowners dump entire buckets of corn into troughs and let a dozen deer stick their muzzles into the same bacterial soup, which is a perfect incubator for TB, chronic waste syndrome, other parasites, and by proximity, they spread the ticks, and the tick density will spike. Now, a hunter will get fined for doing that. A hunter will get fined if he's caught anywhere near a bait spread that somebody else might have put out there. But people in the suburbs, they show you pictures. Look at all the deer I've got in my yard. Look at all the long-legged rats. And the deer get sicker. So if the goal really were public health and the health of the deer herd, you would encourage baiting because it helps hunters to remove more deer more cleanly and more efficiently. Now, the truth of the matter is it's gotten so political that in some states, in my state, the agencies in charge of conservation actually want to allow deer baiting again, but the Democrat legislature is intervening and prohibiting it. So the hunters, the true experts on deer, and the agency in charge are all in favor of baiting, but the legislature, the politician, prohibits it. And then there are crop damage permits. A farmer can get a permit to kill deer which are destroying crops. Now, if you think about it, if the natural forces were controlling deer, these permits would not exist. Think about it. Why aren't the deer in the woods eating the bushes? Why are they coming to the fields near man's habitat and eating crops? It's already a problem by definition. But the deer do it constantly because the deer herd is so inflated that it overwhelms the natural feeding sources. So they come out of the woods. So the crop damage permits are solid proof that the conservation programs are failing. And if that doesn't convince you, let's look at the sandhill cranes. Ted Nugent has talked a lot about these because in Michigan, sandhill crane, which is a game bird, but not in Michigan. Sandhill cranes are so abundant in Michigan that you can walk up to them. They have lost their fear of man. And the ecology of fear is a phrase that everybody should research and learn about because it explains a lot of animal behavior. We'll talk about it on another episode. But the sandhill crane, they're delicious. You breast them out and it tastes like ribeye. They call it the ribeye of the sky. But in Michigan, they're not a game bird. However, they are so abundant that, again, they cause a lot of crop damage. So a farmer can get a permit and legally kill them for crop damage. No surprise there. But get this. After you've shot them, it is illegal to eat them. It's illegal to consume the very bird that was eating the food you provided. Now, that's not conservation. It isn't even ethical. What kind of wildlife management is that when it's just based on somebody's feelings? I had a friend in Florida, and years ago, probably 100 years ago, his grandmother used to hunt cranes there. And the trick she used to wear a hat that had a red feather on it. And for some reason, she said that red feather on the hat helped her to sneak up on the cranes. I'm not sure. I don't know if that worked or not, but that was subsistence hunting. Well, feelings don't have any place in wildlife management. On November 15th, Michigan's firearm deer season opens. And for 14 days, ordinary citizens will be able to do what the agencies won't. Reduce a deer herd responsible for tick spread, for car crashes. I suppose I should have included a section about that. I got my deer a week ago. Coming down the interstate, all of a sudden it appeared. Cars in the body shop, we're driving a rental. And that's the second one in 2 years. It's a third lifetime. And did you know that a few times a year, a car-deer crash results in a fatality? I don't have a statistic on that. So, tick spread, car crashes, crop loss, chronic wasting disease, and now alpha-gal syndrome. So hunters are actually the unpaid public health workforce. But instead of being thanked, they get policed. You have conservation officers who are obsessed with paperwork, trying to give you a ticket based on some technicality. Legislators banning baiting because of optics. Communities outlawing hunting whenever they can. Heck, if you're in the suburbs, you should be encouraging bow hunting. You should be sending your son out into his tree fort with a bow and arrow and having him shoot at that deer that comes and bothers the hostas. Because with the ecology of fear, he wouldn't have to shoot one every year, but the deer would soon learn to go someplace else. But we let public sentimentality override biology. Several years ago, it was probably 20 years ago, because they don't do this anymore. One of the local parks had so many deer, they put out a public service announcements asking for people to come and hunt them. But it was a public announcement. So what happened? Demonstrators came and mocked, jeered, scared the deer away from the hunters who came. Private citizens coming and doing a public service. Can you imagine if you went to fill sandbags to combat flooding of a river and somebody else came and put slits in your sandbags so you couldn't fill them because they thought the river should be allowed to flood? I saw some of these guys on the news walking away in disgust saying, I don't need this. I got a place to hunt. And you got people yelling at them as if they are doing something bad. Because the awfuls, the American white female liberals, just have no sense. Meanwhile, the ticks don't care and the deer don't care. Nature doesn't care. Remember, nature is capitalist. It's going to go wherever the benefits lie. And the only people that get blamed for the problem are the ones actually fighting the problem. The alpha-gal syndrome didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened because we subsidized overpopulation of deer. We protected deer from necessary predation, perhaps unavoidably. But then we politicized hunting, and we romanticize wildlife, pretending it really acts like humans. Then we ignored biology and then simply went to the go-to blame sponge, climate change. But this New Jersey man didn't die because the climate warmed a degree. He died because we treat deer like lawn ornaments instead of the disease vectors that they are. Thank you for listening.